Virtual Battlespace 3 is the Army's flagship gaming program. It's a three-dimensional, first-person shooter simulation that immerses soldiers in a rich and realistic environment. Although fun, the game is serious business and is accredited to train soldiers on more than 100 combined arms tasks.
Nothing changes so quickly, sometimes so slowly if you're at the heart of the battle, as how we bring the military hammer down on enemies of America. The technology is almost impossible to keep up with, yet in the end it's this tech that has the best chance of keeping everyone safe during times when the enemy sometimes has the upper hand before we can properly react. So let us dive into the world of battlefield tech as we welcome in former Army Ranger with 8 combat deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan, over 650 counterterrorism operations. Now with Strike Fighter Consulting, Nick Kemper joins us. Nick, thanks so much for being here.
Hey, how's it going, sir?
It's another day in paradise, Nick. That's what I always say.
Yes, sir.
I'm not really good at my games, but I guess we have to start looking at it that way, because what we just saw was an idea that our soldiers are now learning a tremendous amount from what is basically 3D simulation. Are we making better soldiers this way?
Well, I think what it really does is it adds a human element into the training. And before the simulations like this came out, where you're doing live fire exercises, you're often trying to represent the controlled chaos of combat with by firing at stationary plastic or paper targets, which is very predictable. Human interaction in combat is very unpredictable, and this DSTS virtual reality enables the military to add that human interaction in a safe and effective manner.
Well, let me point out something while you're talking here. We're seeing some videotape of what is basically called the sandbox, and we watched as as basically human hands are in there shaping the terrain, which then allows the soldiers to look at this and to train on this. How do they learn better in this scenario and under this technology than they would if they were just out in the field?
Well, currently when you're planning for an operation, in order to add the terrain aspect so that you can visualize what that terrain is going to look like prior to actually executing the operation, in order to build a sand table, it takes several hours to do. Well, combat troops, and specifically special operations, usually only have maybe 5 minutes to 2 hours to plan such an operation. And what this does is it cuts that time dramatically in order to enable the troops to be able to see not only what an aerial photograph would show, but you can essentially place an aerial photograph showing buildings and vegetation on top of this terrain, this artificial terrain created in this virtual sandbox. And that way, when the helicopters drop you off and you're getting ready to execute your operation, you actually know what the terrain is going to look like ahead of time, and there are a lot less surprises, which basically essentially leaves less improvising on the ground, which is obviously better.
I've got about 90 seconds left here. Tell us a little bit about the virtual reality side that the 101st Airborne is training in, because to me that's fascinating.
Yes, sir. Well, and that's what really, as I was saying before, adds the human element to training. Currently, if we want to use the human element, we have to use blanks or simunition rounds, which are basically paint rounds, and they're not as effective because it just doesn't really simulate exactly how marksmanship and ballistics work together. So this not only gives you your marksmanship aspect, but it also gives you that human interaction, which is so unpredictable in combat.
So we're talking about, if you were to look at this, a realistic kill zone, if you will.
Yes, sir.
And that makes it a whole lot better, because now you can actually see it instead of just firing blanks. You actually are in a war scenario. That makes it so much better to learn in, correct?
That is correct. Now, the only thing that you are losing here is you're losing the exhaustion and the pain of having to run around in the woods or an urban mock-up with 80 pounds of gear on, and you have to be able to know how to carry on a fight with that extreme fatigue. So this just adds another piece to the puzzle. While live fire exercises are still very much important, this adds another tool to the toolbox to be able to use and get our men and women ready to engage in combat.
Making our soldiers better every single day. It's a new way to do it, and it is fascinating. We'll have to talk a little bit more. Nick Kemper from Strike Fighter Consulting, thanks so much for giving us a quick overview. We'll talk again.
Yes, sir. Thank you. God bless.
All right. At 51 after the hour, and telling it like it is, a pair of practical jokers who just can't stop themselves from using Ebola as their attack point. And after the break, we head for Kentucky and a check on what makes this midterm race so fascinating.